Welcome back, Brother Phap Huu. Last time I spoke with you, you were here at Plum Village, and no, you were in Toronto. You were
That's
in
right.
Toronto.
That's right. Thank
Yeah,
you for having me again.
yeah. But maybe we should describe where we are. Will you tell us where we are?
Yes, we are sitting in Zen Master Thich hut in the upper hamlet of Plum Village. And this is where our teacher has lived for many, many years, where he wrote many of the books, edited many of the books, as well as offer many of the teachings throughout the years when he was active in all of the retreats in Plum Village.
And just to describe it, it's very simple. It's two small rooms, all wood, very simple, low, single bed. His shoes are still there. His brown robes are still hung up. You've kept it pretty much the same. And all of the books that he read are on the shelf. It's really
Yes.
lovely. And a beautiful view behind you that I'm looking at of France, the French countryside, which is incredible. Full of flowers right now, sunflowers. Well, I was thinking about talking to you again. And one of the things that I was hoping we could talk about is how, for folks that can't come to Plum Village, if it's too much to travel all this way or their busy lives, but they want to bring some of mindfulness, these practices from Thich Nhat Hanh into their life, I was hoping we could talk a bit about that in the modern world. Because one of the things that's very special about you, as I listen to The Way Out is In and as I learn more about you, is that you are very invested in the evolution of engaged Buddhism and taking it into the modern times, which very much mirrors what Thich Nhat Hanh did as well. So I'm hoping we can talk a bit about that and get into some of the nitty gritty of like technology and teenagers and all of that, wrapping, all of that.
Sure. I think this will be a fun conversation.
Yeah. Well, first, maybe even just describing what engaged Buddhism is for folks that's a newer concept, because it's a little different than just sitting on your cushion.
Right. I think what I would like to start off with is an answer that our teacher gave back when he was interviewed about this particular question: what is engaged Buddhism? And our teacher, we call him Thai, which means teacher in Vietnamese. Thai said, if Buddhism is not engaged, it's really not Buddhism. And this is the approach that our teacher took in bringing a religion that is ancient wisdom, and make it more alive in today's world. Because religion also has a stereotype that is, viewed around it. And even Buddhism, and particularly, I think Zen also, which is like being in stillness, just cultivating peace. And then maybe even a little bit of like spiritual woo-woo. It's like, we leave the world behind and we're in it for our own enlightenment. But actually, Buddhism, the Buddha himself, his core teaching is to be very down to earth, which is there is suffering in the world, and all of us are human beings, and we will experience suffering. And how can we transform our suffering on an individual level to a more collective level, which is family, communities, and then society, and then even think in a bigger scale, which is our planet, our world, and particularly now with the climate change that is happening. So when there's suffering, and Buddhism, which offers teaching, it always have to be viewed like how can it apply to the suffering of today. So Buddhism, engaged Buddhism, was born particularly from the time of the Vietnam War, because our teacher was a young monk at that time, and there was so much suffering around him, so much death, so much division, so much hatred, fear. But also, in the midst of all this chaos, our teacher recognized that human beings still have a capacity of love and understanding. And that's really important, and not to only give into the darkness, but to have the courage to bring out the light that is there, which is the simple happiness. It's like, do you recognize that the blue sky is still there? There's still birds, there's still children, there is still life to be celebrated, as well as how can we as practitioners, Buddhists or not Buddhists, how can we still offer each other hope and love in this time? So that was a key element, which is suffering, which sprung our teacher into finding an appropriate way to teach. And he found so many young people, which now we call them activists, young people who joined his movement, became peace activists in bringing relief to the war. And they would go to destroyed villages and help rebuild. And then our teacher, how to maintain and take care of all these young activists, because you can burn out. So mindfulness was a very key element in his teaching. How do we come home and recognize what we are feeling, our emotions, knowing our limits, knowing that we do need to take one step back just to nourish ourselves and then take 2 steps forward. And then another element of engaged Buddhism, particularly in Plum Village, is about developing a community of friends and folks who come together that have a shared vision, which is peace, or a more mindful life, a more ethical view towards every way of seeing and being, and then interaction. So community for us is very important, because our teacher, he sees that in our times, one Buddha is not enough anymore, one awakened person, but we need a collective awakening. So engaged Buddhism is applying all of the practices that we learn from a retreat or even from books, and asking, now how do I put that into my daily life?
Yeah. Well, I saw it yesterday when we were, in the morning, we did the Avalokiteshvara chant. So all of the monastics came up into the lower hamlet. Was this yesterday or the day before?
It was yesterday.
Was that yes? It's such long days here.
Yes.
It feels like a week ago. So they all came in to the hall, and you put the children up at the front. And there was 2 children sitting next to me, and my son was sitting in front of me. And these were 2 younger children that were lying down. And what's really fun about the hall is that it's really slippery with their socks. So they were reaching their legs out, swooping their feet side to side.
We're 800 right now.
800 people, and they're singing the most beautiful chant. Everyone's crying. And the mother is closing her eyes and meditating. Mm-hmm. She's getting a break and taking in the compassion. And as that was happening, I was getting more and more and more nervous. And in comes a nun from the side. And rather than telling the children to be quiet, which she could have done, she moved the microphone. I don't know if you saw this. She moved the microphone just a foot out of the way so their little feet could continue to wiggle. And that to me was an example of that community.
Yeah.
Because she was taking care of the mother and taking care of the group and taking care of the nuns and taking care of me and my anxiety. So I could just watch and be with the chant. But it feels that way here, that we're all holding each other up.
Yeah.
In some way.
I think our retreat is always we co-create it together. Mm-hmm. And with the collective energy of awareness, everybody, it's like a drop of water in the river, and everybody just know how to swim so that the river continue to flow towards the ocean. Mm-hmm. And what you spoke about is it's a collective awareness, but it's also having this space that we hold together for everybody to arrive into their own body, arrive into the present moment, and then allowing the children to still be children. That's really important for us. Even though we know that the children cannot sit peacefully and still for a long period, but it's so important that the children feel a part of this. And I'm very grateful for Thich and his wisdom for allowing children to come into retreat as well as teenagers, because they are young seeds that will become trees of our world, and to water the right elements to allow them to touch what it means to be in a peaceful environment, what it means to be around people who are cultivating goodness and having the intention to transform their suffering. And then on an individual level, seeing family just be together is very powerful, and having the opportunity to reconcile, to share just the simple moments of joy, the simple moments of ease, maybe a child and a mother holding hand for walking meditation. For us, this is all Zen. This is all spiritual. And then the monastic meeting the children and the teens, not yelling, not telling them that they're not good enough, or having any aggression. Because last week we had a teen boy that was part of the teen group, and he's a natural leader, but because he had his own suffering, he was a little bit rude to the monks and also to some of the staff. So the monastic actually were thinking maybe it's good to ask him to leave the teen program. But one of our brothers taking care of the program came to him and just spoke heart to heart and just said, "My friend, I just want to point out you are a natural leader, and everyone among the teens are looking at you as a role model. So you have a great opportunity right now, which is to show the others how to enjoy this retreat with us, and it's an opportunity for you. And we would like to also listen to, like, what are you going through? Like, we acknowledge that it hasn't been easy, and there's some action that we consider rude. Like, can we understand where this is coming from?" And the shift happened, which is like the monastics recognizing that he's going through something, having some source of understanding. And he was able to express and explain. And of course, it is his own suffering in the family that he is going through with his mother and his father. And then meeting him not as an adult and saying that you're doing something wrong, but it's actually recognizing the capacity that he has, which is leadership, which of course made him feel very happy. And that shifted him beautifully. And he later on, in the last 4 days of the retreat, was fully present, which has such an influence on all of the other teens. So our retreat meditation is also not something like to have an answer at every minute, but it's just to dance with life, like dance with the situation that manifests in our retreats.
Yeah, that's not far off from moving the microphone to give some space. Giving space to a teenager looks different than giving space to a 6-year-old.
Exactly.
But acknowledging the 6-year-old is wiggling because that's what 6-year-olds do, or the teenager, the conditions that are he's experiencing that are being expressed in his behavior. And my son, he's in the teenage program, and I haven't seen him all week. I have not seen him at all. I thought we were going to come have this family experience like we did last year, and he's off. He's gone. He's meditating here in the morning, you said. And tell me about what you've experienced in watching. This is the 3rd week of the family retreat. What you've seen in terms of what families are struggling with and what practices you think may be particularly helpful for them.
So for someone who is very new to Plum Village, coming as a family, there's always a fear of, will my child actually like this? I'm facilitating like Adama Family. So in an Adama Family in our retreat, it means from 800, we break into many groups of 20 people, and we go through a journey for 7 days. We would have dinner together. We would have sharing groups together. So we get to know each other through the span of 7 days. And there was a couple that came from New York, and I asked them, how's it going on the first day? And they're like, well, we are okay, but we are afraid that our sons, they have 2 sons, if they would actually be able to enjoy this experience. The elder was very curious and wants to be here. The younger one has a little bit of hesitance. And particularly in the teens program, like, we ask all the teenagers to give up their phones. So in a way, it's like it's their ticket in, and it's a sacrifice. But we tell them, if you look at it, it's only 7 days. And it's a real opportunity to reconnect. So I think, like, for every family coming into a retreat, it's just learning to surrender to the present moment, learning to surrender to the retreat, because we're all carrying these emotions, these feelings, whether it is stress, whether it is busyness, projects, just many things that we have been accumulated, also the pandemic and so on, and just letting all of that dust settle. And we all need time and space, and not to be too ambitious. Because we sometimes our mentality is like we try to fix everything in like a retreat, or we try to realign ourselves, and if it doesn't happen, then we think it's a failure. But for us, like in Zen, there's no such thing as failure. Like everything needs conditioning, and it needs time to ripen. Like a fruit, it needs time to ripen, but you have to water it, and you have to give it the right source of energy, water, sun, etc. So I see in the family, like just the anxiety, the stress, and then letting that calm down, and then trusting is a big part, that the experience will let the children and the adults come back into their own body, come back into who they are. And on the last day of the retreat, that couple shared in my family that they recognized their son reconnecting to the child they knew they were, because of all the electronics that is so captivating us into the future or into another dimension, that we forget who we are. And then that allows the parents to also come back inwards, because once the fear and the anxiety is settled, you get to be more alive in a way. And one recommendation from our insight of interbeing, I had a conversation with a couple from Germany, and they came with their 9-month-old boy, and he was crawling, and we all watching him mindfully. And the mother asked me, "Brother, before we leave here, any advice you would have for me to and my husband to find the right balance in our life and have time for our child and have time for us?" And so somehow that question, there's a divide, which is like time for the child and then time for us. So I said, according to Buddhism, everything is interconnected. And what my insight I would offer is, I would ask you to remove that concept or that view that your time with your child is not your time. And you think that your time with your child is just to take care of him. But in Buddhism, we learn of a teaching called no self, which means we cannot be by ourselves. Everything is conditioned. If we look into ourselves, we also see our father, our mother, our ancestor, genetic, spiritual, even land and cosmic. So if we remove these elements, then we are not us. So we are made of non-us element. So the child and the mother, I was explaining to the mother, every precious moment that you're with your child, that is you being with you also. Because that moment is your transmission to your child and the child's transmission to you. And there is something that is happening, which is the 3 times coming together, the past and the future in this present moment of the parent and the child. So we need to slowly remind ourselves that when that perception comes out, okay, I need time for myself and I don't have enough time because I'm always with my child, we can have a different view that this is my time.
Yeah. Well, having gone through that with young children, there's the feeling of I need time away, I need time for myself. And then there's something that happens around age 12 where your child is saying, I need time away, I need time for myself. and the time that I've spent here without my child, I've been very connected to him. So it's very much that no self, that even though we're apart, he is part of me, and I'm thinking of him, or I'm noticing things, or I'm wondering about how this would look through his eyes. This morning, my husband missed the bus from Lower Hamlet to New Hamlet, which we were informed, if you miss the bus, it's a 5-hour walk, which I guess is true because he biked it. But I didn't know where he was. And so we were in the long slow walking meditation through New Hamlet, up through the plum trees and down, and very slow. And the whole time all I could think about is where is he? Where is he? So even though he wasn't there, he was there. And looking at every single face. And then I waited at the end and for the full, every single person to walk through. Is that him? Is that him? Is that him? So even though we're together, it is still time for us ourselves. And when we're apart, it is still time that we're together. So it's been many little lessons like that when you have time. But you mentioned technology, and I was behind a teenager that had to turn over his phone. And I think his parents didn't tell him about this before they brought him to the camp, because when the monastic said I don't remember what the 3 rules were. You probably know what they are. There's 3 rules. One is you have to do all the things. You have to show up at everything. The second is you have to turn over your phone. I forget what the third one was. I don't know.
I don't remember too.
I don't know. There was a third rule. But as soon as they said turn over your phone, he didn't want to turn it over. And he'd come all this way, and he didn't pull it out of his pocket. It was like a intense moment. And I'm standing behind him with my son who doesn't have a phone, and we're looking at each other. And I'm like, this is why you don't have a phone. Imagine how difficult it is to let go of it once you've attached to it. So that was about 5 minutes before I ran into you. And when I ran into you, our first conversation, we talked about Christiana Figueres. And you're like, let me show you her rap. Because I was talking about how she had talked to me about rapping and how you had influenced her. Let me show you her rap video on Instagram. And it was really cool to see. So there's 2 sides to this. There's the struggle of we're attached to it. It's consuming our minds, pulling us out of the present. And then there's also the connection and joy and sharing that we get through our phones. And I'm curious how you've dealt with that here and recommendations for those of us that maybe struggle with our teenagers' use or our own use.
I think this is a collective question for all of us in society right now, as we know very clearly that technology, particularly phones, iPads, any screens, it's a way to, first of all, entertain and tell us that, if you have suffering, it's okay, take refuge here, because we can entertain your suffering, your loneliness, your craving. So this is the first awareness I would just want to point out when we all reflect on how our consumption is with technology. And then on the other side, like you just mentioned, it is an instrument, it's a vehicle that can allow connection to be possible around the world globally through technology, through the internet. And we've learned the power of technology. If it is done with the right intention, it can be very resourceful and very helpful. But if it is done with an intention that is to just create more money, then we know that can become very toxic, as we know all of the electronic games, movies, music, especially pornography and so on. It is a way to suck us out of the present moment and into a dark hole that we may not even be realizing. So this is where I feel spirituality is very important. And when I speak about spirituality, it's not about religion. Spirituality for us is a way of life. It's a way of seeing and a way of being. We can still use technology as a means to support and creating a mindful habit. We have a lot of habits, and we can cultivate boundaries around everything. So creating clarity is very important. Like, what is the intention we are using our technology for? And then having a commitment to oneself, as well as a commitment to that we can make among our community or our family, and even some rules. I've seen this in family, and I witnessed a child who's 8 years old coming from Canada with his mother, and he has a phone very strictly just to communicate to his mother. And in my mind, I'm like, is this even possible? And I saw it. He told me that, I have a phone, but I only use it very strictly because to communicate to my mother and father because that was the rules. So there is a way of communication and explaining why this is important. And I think a lot of the times we think that the child won't understand and won't cooperate, but I believe if we meet them as human beings and not as like a child and like just say, oh, you won't get it, just wait until you're older, but actually like this is really important. This is really important for you to understand the power of this technology and have responsibility for it. So it is it's something that us monastic, to be honest, is not easy also. We're all practicing with it.
Mm-hmm.
We know that all of us can be addicted to this. And every time we get addicted to it or we get lost in it, mindfulness practice is to call out our own bad habits, our own suffering, having that courage. So in our own way of life is we have particular, we call them precepts, they're guidance in our way of being monks and nuns. And if we break a training, we would learn to acknowledge it and even apologize. And we find our mentors or somebody who is elder in our community just to share from the heart, like, I did this and I know it doesn't feel right. And the power of acknowledging can offer reconciliation within oneself. And on a global scale, I think it's so important to look at ethics, especially now with AI coming into our society and becoming a very powerful instrument. And our teacher once offered a talk at Google and saying that in technology, of course, there's innovation, but there has to be insight. And there has to also be intention, right intention. The 3 I's, he would call it: innovation, intention, and insight. If we do it properly, then we won't be lost and we won't allow it to make us lose who we are. And right now, particularly, I feel that our collective consciousness is in a place where young people, children and teens, we feel like we're not enough. We feel like we're not doing enough, and therefore we get carried away by images where social media can add a lot of complexity, inferiority particularly, and that we're not good enough, we need to be better. And therefore, it pushes ourselves to run towards a happiness maybe that's very superficial. And technology on the social media side does this very well, and it is studied. There is, I would even say, like, scientific ways to get all of us addicted to. And so therefore, as a practitioner, sometimes it feels like it's going against the stream. It's like having the courage to stop. Mm-hmm. And that is why in Plum Village, every time we hear the sound of the bell, we're all invited to take a pause and come back to our mindful breathing. And this is something everyone can do in the world. We can find like the sound of the church bell or the sound of a chime in our clock, or we can even create a bell, which we did a Plum Village app, and it rings every 1 hour or 45 minutes, and it just invites all of us to take a pause, reconnect to what we're doing, and have a moment to see where is my mind. And so having the courage and having the ability to say, okay, that's enough for today. So as somebody who is like to innovate, like you said, I'm part of the construction planning for our community, and I just was looking at different retreat centers, and now there's something that is growing, which is like to go into a countryside space where huts are being built, and then everybody gets a technology detox. Mm-hmm. And what they do is they have a box where everybody puts their phone in. It's just kind of like the teen program.
Yeah.
But we just have like little envelopes.
Yeah.
But you lock it up for 3 days. So intention is there, and that commitment, because sometimes we need that action because our habits are so strong.
Well, there's also something about the collective energy here, because you didn't have everyone lock up their phones, but very few people are on their phones. I mean, you'll see every once in a while someone will pull out a phone to take a picture or maybe take a little video, but that's that's maybe 10% of people even pulling out their phone. And there's a collective, I think the collective experience is there's so much good here. What else would be better inside my phone than what I'm seeing and hearing and tasting and smelling and experiencing, and the people that aren't on their phones. So therefore I just can sit down next to someone and have a conversation with them. So there's the insight and the mindfulness bells that remind us to come back. And then there's also the support of the community. And that's my hope, is to be in spaces where we can support each other in putting the technology away, and then pulling it out to show, pictures of, this is where I live, or this is a video of Christiana Figueres.
Exactly.
Which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the intention aspect has been another teaching for me here. There's many different meditations that you do at Plum Village. You do walking meditation and sitting meditation, and you do service meditation. I'm in the toilet cleaning group, and we gathered as a group, and the first thing that we do is we sing songs. But then the next thing that our volunteer leader, Sophie, had us do was announce our intention before going in and cleaning the toilets. One person said, "I'm here to clean the toilets because I want to be able to have a feeling show up and then still be able to have an action. So if I feel disgust, I can still wrap up the little trash bag and put it, even though I'm feeling disgust, have a little separation between my feelings and my actions." And just having that shift in intention changed the whole experience. Can you talk more about just intention and how you use that here? Because it could change anything. I mean, your phone use, or cleaning the toilet, or a conversation you're having with somebody.
Yeah, intention for us is it's an energy. It's a source of food. And we speak about intention, and we also speak about volition, which is aspiration. And as a monk, or even as somebody who's not a monastic living in the world, we all know that we all have a deep desire that our hearts generate, and sometimes we don't have time to listen to it. And for a large percentage, it has to do something with love, in terms of cultivating love, offering love back to our own family, or generating love to offer to the world, to the suffering that is there. And all of us, we do need to create time to sit down and just to ask ourselves, in this lifetime, which is not that long, 80 years, 100 years, 120 years, we think it's long, but in the span of what our planet has lived is nothing, which is a speck of dust. And therefore, one day we will return back to the earth. This is a truth. This is an insight that can free us to live life more deeply. And therefore, we have a deep desire, which we should have time to reflect and see if we are cultivating it. And then we have daily concern, daily intentions, such as taking care of the bills, making sure our son, our daughter has the right conditions to become a good human being, etc., etc. And how do we weave it all into our deep aspiration? And intention is a power that everybody has. And when we want to connect to each other, it's so important to also understand each other's intention. Our teacher always speaks about love as not a feeling, a one-time feeling, but love is to grow, it is to be developed, to cultivate. And the foundation of true love is understanding. It's understanding each other's intention, understanding each other's deepest aspiration, understanding each other's suffering, what we're going through, and just listening. So intention for us is a source of energy of how we act, our body, our speech, and our thoughts. And sometimes we do have to reflect on our intention. Is it leading us to a more sustainable way of life, or is it leading us to a destruction of humanity? We have been creating retreats for climate leaders and activists in the last 2 years. And recently, recognizing like the oil companies are still not playing a part in reducing emission, but they're investing even more because they receive much more. And where's that source is greed. So their intention is just greed. It's just to get more rich. And we know that unless somebody can actually shake them up, wake them up, it's going to be very hard to shift that system, to shift that consciousness. And that's why all of us play a part in this, though. If all of us can help change the narrative, change the intention, it will have a large impact. Just like when we throw a pebble into a pond, it's one pebble, but it has a ripple. And the more pebbles we keep throwing into the pond, it will create a wave. So therefore, intentions for us is already action. So therefore, mindfulness of body, speech, and mind is so important to understand where we are guiding ourselves in terms of our views, our thinking, our perception, which becomes also our intentions.
Another concept that has permeated throughout this retreat is joy and happiness. And in Western psychology, there's been sort of this swing from like the positive thinking movement to now it's toxic positivity. And it feels that the joy and happiness that is taught here is different and is very much is very central to suffering, to being able, the Dharma talk that was given yesterday morning on past, present, future, and the importance of joy. But the question that I have in that is that I will often, as a therapist, I'll work with clients who are in deep suffering. And it can be the suffering of like they're going through a divorce, and they'll often say like, I'll feel good in 2 years when I'm through all of this horrific divorce and the pain in my kids and all of that. Or maybe they're going through suffering of health issues where they have a diagnosis and every single time they have to wait for a test to come back. It's excruciating pain. And in those situations, sometimes I have a hard time to say cultivate joy. And I'm wondering how you would work with that.
Very good question. So I'm first gonna lead to a teaching of the Buddha, and it's an insight that we cultivate in Plum Village too, and you've heard it. It is called dwelling happily in the present moment. And happily in the present moment is not waiting for a moment when all the suffering is over and then we're happy. But the Buddha and our teacher Tai teaches us, even amidst suffering, we can still be able to recognize the beauty that is there. And the beauty here is not an illusion that we're creating. The beauty is the reality of life. Let's say, coming back to our own body, recognizing that I'm still alive. Because I am alive, there's still possibility. Because I'm alive, I still have good eyes to see my loved ones. I still have a heart that can beat, that can teach me how to connect, how to love. So it is training ourselves to recognize the joy and the happiness that are in the present moment that we can still touch, such as having a cup of tea, eating food, going for a walk, surrendering ourselves to nature when we suffer, asking nature to listen to our suffering. And we've learned, and there's proof that when we know how to connect to nature, we can allow nature to also heal us. Just like animals, they have this deep insight of stopping and resting. When they're injured, they know how to stop. They don't look for a prey. They don't look for a mate. They know how to retreat and rest in order to heal. And for us, that is also joy. Having the joy to know to rest. Having the joy to know that I'm wounded. The joy not in the wound, but the joy that recognizing that I'm suffering. That for us is knowing how to suffer. And this is an insight because there's never ever going to be a time and space where there's no suffering in our world. When I realized this in my own life, because I think I was also brought up like in a way like a go-getter, like I want to be able to create a world where there's no more suffering, and only then will I stop working. And our teacher has explained to us that suffering and happiness are two pairs that coexist. Therefore, if there is happiness, there is suffering. Whether it is not our suffering, it can be a collective suffering. So just to be free from that illusion that happiness is only when this doesn't exist anymore is a wrong view. And so the insight of dwelling happily in the present moment is giving us agency as a human being to stop, to rest, to look deeply, and to still see the wonderful conditions that are there. I myself have had some deep transformation in terms of my own childhood trauma. And I was bullied, I was abused, but I was very lucky that I had loving parents, but those wounds were deep. And fortunately, I came to Plum Village through a family retreat like this, and recognizing that there are people that are loving. I had to learn to trust that. And I can only transform that in the present moment. And in my practice, there are moments when I meet the trauma. I meet a person who resembles, let's say, the one who abused me. I go into turtle mode. I freak out. Your whole body retracts because of fear. And one day I just asked myself, every time I see these people, why do I allow myself to copy and paste that past in this present moment? And that was an aha moment for me. And I truly smiled. I had a joy right there. Even though my suffering hasn't ended, but I had a moment of recognizing where my suffering come from. And then as a therapist, the healing takes time. And every time that suffering comes up again, in our practice, is learning to smile to the suffering. Because that suffering is me. And we have the practice of listening to our inner child, taking care of our inner child, and transforming our inner child. So therefore, that inner child of the past, teaching it that it can be happy in the present moment with who you are now. And of course, this is particularly in trauma and particularly in the suffering from the past. But even in the midst of a suffering of the present moment, yes, we have to take care of the suffering. We are allowed to feel sadness, to feel even anger and frustration. But our responsibility is also to take time to work with it and to transform it. And therefore, we don't bypass. We can't use spirituality as a bypass. And that toxic joy that you spoke of, I know of it. I've seen it. And I see it on TikTok and I see it on Instagram. And, just be happy. Things will pass. That's bypassing, and that's not real mindfulness. For us, that is wrong mindfulness in a way. That's just to feel good about yourself, but then not care. For us, the joy is understanding. And the joy is right action. but the joy also lets us not cripple ourselves because of all the suffering that we have, because we are an artist in this present moment. Mindfulness allows you to have a paintbrush and how you live today, so that you can cultivate this moment to become a better past and heal the wounded past that you have been carrying for so long. And during my practice, I had a moment when I was like, the present moment is where I will heal that deep wounded child. And that deep wounded child is still with me today, but it has become much happier. And moments when I'm in a particular circumstance, that fear come up, but with my mindfulness, I can acknowledge it and I smile. I hear it right away and I say, it's okay. Come back to the breathing. You are enough. Trust yourself. Be confident. You know how to take care of yourself. So these becomes my mantra. These words become words of power for me. And it's not wishful thinking, because it's very real in this present moment. I am embracing the past here and now. And so therefore, in the suffering, there's joy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It reminds me of the talk this morning where a sister brought out the slice of aspen tree wood, and then it had all these concentric circles, and she was talking to the children, showing them each year that the tree grew older, and then pointed out that some years there was drought, and so it was a smaller circle, or there's places where it was wounded. And I loved how she described that wounding is imprinted in the tree, in the history of the tree, but the tree kind of embraces with the next circle. And I love that about these teachings, because it's not about erasing it or getting rid of it or making it better. It's about embracing it and taking care of it and transforming it that way, which requires those mindful check-ins, those bells every hour plus here. One question that I want to ask you, because of the focus of this season, is focused on wise effort. And I am curious for you how you define that, and how you. I know that there's the Buddhist understanding of wise effort, but also just your personal understanding of wise effort, especially as you're thinking about things. How you want to spend your time. You're very busy.
Ironically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ambitious.
Thank you for the question. It's inviting me to also just reflect and take a pause. Looking at my my own life, and I've had such a privilege of being so close to Thich, and seeing his motivation in offering the teachings, and he was also a very busy monk. But I saw the joy he had in it, and the quote unquote work was actually not for others, but in return we receive that nourishment. Like when somebody comes for the first day of the retreat, they're anxious, they're sad, they're tired, and they leave with freshness, with life energy, and with so much more confidence into walking back into where they their homes and their workplace. That gift is unconditional, and that gives me so much life, and that gives me so much energy. And that is what we call bodhicitta. It means the seed of awakening and the seed of love. And that's how I cultivate myself, because I don't do this for a salary. I mean, I'm an abbot. I do podcasts. I help lead retreats with all of my brothers and sisters, but we still all, each month, 40 euros. We still line up at the table to get food. We still wash our own bowls at the line with everyone. And, this helps me be humble also. And so wise effort is also finding the joy in the simple actions, in the simple moments, these little nooks in life that sometimes if you are not mindful, you just bypass it. So in the work that we do, just having moments to check in with each other And every time I check in with a brother, they always think like I have work for them. And I'm like, no, I'm just checking in how you're doing. And just like those moments of also like my actions has impact. So how can I support? How can I empower my brothers and sisters? And everybody has complexes. I have complexes, inferiority, superiority, even equality, like trying to be better, trying to be as good as that person, and so on. And we're all practicing with this. And so effort is like, how can I allow myself to become more free each day, allow my brothers and sisters also touch that inner freedom in them in the action, and also really, really being determined to practice laziness when we have those lazy days. Tomorrow. Having the courage to say no. Our teacher said the hardest things in life is saying no sometimes, because so many people has good intention, but we're so limited. And I learned this from Thai because, since 2010, I would say like the rise of mindfulness just peaked. And then Thai's own teaching became much on demand. That's when, he got interviewed by Oprah, by Time, and da-da-da. And let's say that's the limelight effect. But Thai never allowed that to take over. He actually created even more barriers. He's like, okay, after this, if you want to interview me, you got to partake in a retreat. Because if you don't partake in a retreat, what are you writing about? You can just Google all this and just make an article. Right. But if you want to interview me, you need to at least taste this. So, right effort, just like right mindfulness is, for me, is like, I don't have a particular like guidebook that is always right, but learning to listen to my heart. One of my coach friend who I met in Plum Village, every time we get on a call, he asks me, how's your heart? Not how are you, but how's your heart? So that changes my autopilot, of saying, oh, I'm doing fine. But every time it makes me pause, because I have to come from a genuine place, because my heart speaks my truth. So I need to, I say, oh, actually, I feel quite exhausted, but I'm also feeling very happy. So also learning to listen to my heart. Like, we have these 14 days of break after August 26th, which is the last day of our educator retreat, which is like the sprint of our summer from May, June, July, August. We have 2 weeks off as a community, and we're creating a lot of trips like camping, mountains, beach, and some would just remain here because it can be so quiet. And I'm making a commitment to just spend time alone, and write an auto reply that says Brother Phap Huu doesn't exist until September 13th. So if you don't get a reply, I am taking care of myself. And so allowing us to rest, allowing us to also regenerate as to be sustainable for everyone. Yeah.
We want that for you.
Thank you.
Because your sustainability is our sustainability. And when I left for my 2 weeks with my auto reply, my clients were all, go. They said, go, please. Because they know that when I come back, I'll have more energy for them. So that's the nature of interbeing too. If you don't take those 2 weeks, then we don't get the energy in the same way, the collective energy. So I love that description of wise effort, and thank you for that. And I hope you do rest. And thank you for this beautiful time in Thai's hut. My moment of joy was seeing his shoes. Because I've watched those shoes walking, and to see them there and then seeing you walking in his footsteps, it's very precious.
Thank you, Diana, for having me back on the podcast.
Back on the podcast. Yes. And thank you to Brother Nim Choi, who's doing our audio over here. This probably is going to be the best sounding podcast that we've ever done. So thank you so much for taking this time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.